So good afternoon, Martin Loving here again with a new cooking video. This one is going to be my March recipe. What we're going to be doing is a real simple kind of a take on pork chops and applesauce. So real easy to put together, just a few ingredients, and guaranteed to be absolutely delicious. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to start with our starch, which in this case what we're going to use is we're going to use some sweet potatoes. So I'm just going to trim up the ends a little bit on the sweet potatoes. And in this case we're actually going to leave the peel on these. So just to get the size I'm looking for, I'm just going to cut them in half. And then I'm going to use the French fry slicer on this on the Saladaster food processor here. We're just going to grate these up real nice here. You can see they kind of got just a nice kind of French fry shape. And we'll get the last piece done here. And then I'll use a little hopper here to kind of finish them off. Now we'll get all of this started cooking. So this is going to be the thing that takes just the longest. I've already preheated my pan. Now in this case, I do like to use a little bit of oil with my starch. Of course, it's not necessary with these pans, but everybody's got a little different style, so if you don't want to add the oil, that's an optional ingredient. So we're just going to add that to the pan there. Get it started cooking, and I'm going to put the lid right on it there. So we're just going to let that go for a minute while I move on to the next part. So next, we're going to dice up or julienne up a couple of onions. So real quick, just cut off the top and the bottom of them. And we're going to split them in half. And just take this outer skin off of your onions. Do the same with our number 2 onion. And I'm going to make sure, I'm just going to get my pan preheated here for the onions. So that by the time I get them all cut up, they're ready to go. And a nice knife style. If you use your hand in kind of a claw motion, you can use your fingers to adjust your cuts. And it gives you no way of really cutting your fingers when you do that. And then I just rotated the onion. And I'll show you these slices up a little closer when I get them all done. And to prove anybody can do these cuts, I've had lots of experience as a chef, but I used to do everything, all my cuts were done right-handed until I had a wrist injury. And now I have learned to do left-handed cuts. So I can learn to do this left-handed. Anyone can learn to do this with their dominant hand. Now, if anybody's really sensitive to onions and tears up a lot, there's nothing that will help that better than having a nice sharp knife. So what we've got is a couple of onions julienned up real nice. Now again, I like to put just a couple drops of oil in a pan. Again, not totally necessary with these pans that I'm using. I've got a medium-sized Saladaster Sautéd pan here that I'm using. I'm going to go ahead and get this food processor out of the way. So we're going to saute those down real nice. Now I'm just adding a little bit of sea salt to them. So pre-salting them helps give them extra flavor and will also help pull out some of the water so that they cook down faster. You can hear a nice sound going on with the sweet potatoes there. They're cooking nicely. And we're going to keep prepping some stuff. So we're going to do some asparagus. Best way to do asparagus is just to snap it like that. It'll basically break at as soon as it turns to the least fibrous part. So what you can do is you can line up 4 like that. You don't want to snap them all at once, snap them individually. And just keep snapping your asparagus. Just like so. Your asparagus is ready for later. We've got our pork chops over here. So for pork chops, at this point I am going to just pre-season them. So with all your proteins, it's a good thing to season them in a little bit advance before you cook them. And then I'm just giving a quick grate of fresh black pepper. Just grinding it fresh there. Just go ahead and flip those. Nice generous coating of sea salt on them. And then black pepper. So those will be ready to start cooking here in a bit. I want to make sure that these have a nice head start. A couple other things one other thing I'm going to be prepping out. This is our last ingredient. Got some nice apples. So these ones are Cosmic Crisps. That's the name of the apple. They are a cross between a Honey Crisp and an Enterprise apple. They're kind of a good all-around, they're good to eat, but they're also good to cook with. They maintain a bit of crispness, and they're just really delicious apples. All I'm doing is cutting around the core of these apples. I'm kind of leaving the core intact there. You can cut a little bit more off there. Core's going away, I'm not going to use that. And then these apples, we're just going to slice. Very similar to the onions. So we just get nice little apple slices like that. While everything's cooking, we'll just slice these up. Continue to slice these up while everything's cooking down. Give the sweet potatoes a stir. And we'll turn down the heat just a hair on them. And at this point, I'm going to give the sweet potatoes just a little touch of seasoning there. I'm going to leave the top off for just a bit because I want them to brown up and get a little bit of color before they steam too much. Notice how I'm holding my knife, choking up a little bit on the knife, grabbing a hold of the handle here, so that, or the blade a little bit, so that I've got a little bit more control over the blade. What that would look like in a right-hand grip would be something like that. Left-hand grip would be about like so. So we've got our apples sliced up. So nice, beautiful slices of apples there. Onions are just going to get stirred a bit more, so we want those to cook down. So everything's going to continue to cook there until everything's to your desired texture. And what we're going to use for our pork chops is I'm going to use a electric skillet here. I've already preheated it up, but I'm going to turn the temp up. I'm going to turn it to right at 450. Bring the electric skillet in view here. It's always important if you want your knife to stay sharp is as soon as you get the chance, make sure you clean it off. Just a quick rinse and a wipe down does help. That way it doesn't react with any of your ingredients. And you don't get any of the acids or anything that's dulling your knife up. So we're going to get this electric skillet in view here. It's going to preheat a little bit. So what I'm going to do in the electric skillet is pork chops are going to go in first, and then I'm going to finish the asparagus in the same pan, because there's going to be some nice, delicious pork drippings in the bottom of that pan that I'm going to help to season my asparagus with. So that's going to get cooked in the same pan there. Everything here is going to continue cooking down. So I'm going to cook those sweet potatoes down until they start to brown and get a nice color. The onions I'm going to cook down until they are totally caramelized. Each one, I mean, depending on where you are, your elevation, and the heat that you're putting them on, and how much liquid is in your onions, times can vary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep cooking those. And then we're going to get our pork chops seared. Again, I'm just using about a tablespoon of oil just to... And the reason I use oil is I just like the sear that I get with a little bit of oil. Just better than without, but it's a totally optional ingredient. You can hear a nice sizzle when you put these pork chops in. I'm going to let those cook. So what's going to happen is everything's going to cook down. The asparagus is going to go in with the pork chops when that's all said and done. So they're pulled. And then the apples are going to go in with these onions once the onions are caramelized. Okay, so what I've done here is I've turned off the heat because my sweet potatoes are where I want them to be. They just got a nice brown. You can see that my onions are just starting to caramelize. So they're starting to turn brown. So they're at the point I want them to be. Pork chops are ready to turn over. So I like to have a nice sear, as you can see on that pork chop there, before I turn them. So I'm going to flip them. And what I'm going to do is kind of group them all real nicely together so I can make a little bit of room in my pan for my asparagus. Asparagus is right here. I just put a little salt on the asparagus. I'm just going to put the asparagus in, and I'm going to cover this up for a little bit because I do want to get that asparagus a little steamy. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I do want some of the juice to cook out of these apples. So I'm going to start adding some apples to my onions here. And I've got the apples right, apple and onion mix. This is on high heat. For everything else is like the sweet potatoes I cooked all on medium heat. On this stove it showed a number 4 for that. And then I've got all my apples in. I'm just going to borrow my lid over here for my sweet potatoes, and I'm going to let that steam out a little bit too. I want to get those apples cooked as quickly as possible. And all I'm doing is just trying to get a little bit more surface area to cook on for my asparagus. The asparagus is just going to hang out with the pork for a little bit here. And everything here is going to cook down. And a couple of things for pork. Digital meat thermometer is a kind of a nice touch for pork because you can get an exact reading of the temperature of it. Pork, you don't need to cook it all the way through. The FDA recommends a minimum of 140 degrees on pork. So you can cook it to 140 instead of 160. There's also, you can go by how firm it is. Pork really, the muscle starts to really tighten up the longer you cook it. And that's also why some people don't like pork chops as much, is because they tend to be a little bit tougher meat when they're cooked all the way through. Cooking anything all the way through, well done, is right at 160, 165, right in that ballpark. So if you want to cook it to 160, that would be a good point for your well done people. If you cook it at 140, you're going to have a nice medium pork chop. I'm just checking the firmness of the pork chop now. To me, they feel pretty close to done, but we'll just go ahead and get our meat thermometer in there. And they're showing right at 139. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pull all of these, nice sear on the bottom, and I'm just going to let them sit, because they're going to continue to cook for the next few minutes. And if you cut into any meat while it's cooking, you're going to lose all the juices out of it. You're going to get dry pieces. I'm just letting them rest on a plate over here to the side. And they're just going to hang out there for about 10 minutes until we're ready to eat. And I'm just getting the asparagus. I like to get a nice brown on my asparagus. I'm just checking the tenderness with my thumb. And then the juice is starting to release from the apples. So I'm actually going to take my lid off because I want some of that liquid to evaporate. I don't want all that liquid in here with this. I don't want it to be a real liquidy vegetable sauce. So we're going to let that go. The asparagus is starting to look really nice. Got some nice brown on it. The trick with asparagus is you want to keep it nice and crisp in the center. All you're trying to do is get a nice sear on the outside. So with your asparagus, you can get it just a nice brown like that on there. We're going to call it done. So right now I'm just going to turn my electric skillet off. And my asparagus is going to sit and rest over here with my pork. So that's all done. Just going to put the lid on the skillet. I'm just going to let that sit for right now. So we'll finish up this sauce, and we're actually just going to start plating up. So we usually use with these spoons for a portion. About 1.5 gives you a nice portion, as you can see, of your sweet potatoes. We're going to take one of these pork chops here. Just kind of lay it like so. And while it's cooking down, just kind of off to the side, I've got my apples and onions. Put some nice green asparagus on there. And to finish this off, I like to use just a little bit of balsamic vinegar. What we're going to do is we're just going to do a nice drizzle across there. And there you go. There is my take on pork chops and applesauce. Nice, easy to make, quick dinner that I'm sure you'll find delicious.